Delighted to be here today with Mark Gallagher, doyen of the F1 scene and master of the speaking world. So, how did the two worlds come together?
The two worlds came together because when I was commercial director of the Jordan Formula One team, which Eddie Jordan, which some people might know from BBC Top Gear and such things, when Eddie Jordan had his Formula One team, I was running a commercial side, and part of running the commercial side of a Formula One team is that you're constantly presenting.
Okay.
Particularly to multinational companies, because I mean, my job was to bring in the money. At the peak, we were bringing in about 150 million a year into the team, to fund the team, and that was coming from companies like MasterCard and NatWest and Pearl Assurance, and we had a tobacco sponsorship, and we had Honda, and with all these amazing companies who we were working with. So we had a portfolio of like 15 or 20 companies, and I was literally spending every day presenting.
Okay. And
then, of course, the inevitable happened, and someone from outside of Formula One said, "We actually heard you speaking at an event. Would you like to come in?"
And was it different when you were in a role, performing a role, to when you were actually on stage for the first time?
It was different because I was a little bit limited in what I could talk about, because being in one camp meant that I could really only talk about that team.
Okay.
Kind of the default was I didn't really want to talk about our competitors.
Okay.
And of course I wanted to present a beautifully polished view of what we did, because we were perfect. The reality, of course, was that the richness in the experience of being on the board of a Formula One team is that most of the time we were in the trenches fighting. Yeah. And we had all the problems that any normal company has, and that ultimately then proved to be the ammunition that I could then use in public speaking, because of course we win sometimes, but most of it is trying to lead and drive a high performance team in what is a very difficult and competitive environment.
And I think that's what, for me, what's always so beautifully is, like, everyone knows, however much you like F1 and like cars, still you're intrigued by the whole glamour of the whole thing, but behind it, it's ruthless business.
It is a ruthless business. It is relentlessly competitive. I mean, I know you're into your football, and you would know the season's hardly finished, and the new one is coming over the horizon. Same in Formula One. The only difference in our sport is that to start each season we have to produce a completely new product, which is a very complicated Formula One car, and that takes months of preparation. And so you have the human factor, as we have with any sport, but then you have this technological background. And what I find through my public speaking is that the kinds of clients that I speak for are large companies with manufacturing facilities or complex operations, and so they like the sporting analogy, but they love the layer of the fact that a Formula One team is an engineering and a technology company. So they love the fact that we're in that space where we have to create something and bring it to market.
And so, okay, with a few days to go before the opening of the 2019 season, how do you view F1 and where it is? And
so Formula One as a sport has been going through some quite difficult times, because we've had dominance by one team, and in any sport, when you can think of footballing teams that have dominated.
Never my team, unfortunately.
Yeah. So Mercedes-Benz and Lewis Hamilton have been dominating Formula One in the current era. And that's difficult from a sporting point of view, because the results have been a little bit predictable. And of course, people love uncertainty in sport. You like to see the underdog winning, you know. So we still talk in Formula One about the fact that we would love to have our Leicester City, moment.
Could it ever happen?
It could happen. It could happen. And what it needs is the regulatory environment to support that, because the regulations at the moment are just, unfortunately, angled very much towards benefiting the very, very large teams.
Right.
And there's a huge effort being put into balancing that and bringing it back to allow the underdog to have a chance now and again, as we did at Jordan. We won 4 Formula One races, and we were a privately owned team, and we didn't have a big car manufacturer partnering with us. So, of course, the sport would love to see a return to that. So Formula One, from a sporting point of view, has been going through A period of domination by one team. This year is going to be very exciting.
Okay.
I'm going to be brave here since we're talking at the beginning of the 2019 season and say that Mercedes will not have it all their own way this year. And I think Ferrari are very exciting. And I personally, after all these years in the sport, actually have a new hero in Formula One. So we have a young guy from Monte Carlo called Charles Leclerc. He's a young guy, he's in his early 20s. He's been signed by the Ferrari team. He's a formidable talent.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that he could well be the guy that will upset the Lewis Hamilton apple cart.
Okay.
Finally. So we've got this new kid on the block, driving for the biggest team, Ferrari. I think it's going to be an exciting season. There's a lot, and my old team at Red Bull Racing, who I worked with for a number of years, they're also looking in pretty competitive shape. So from a sporting perspective, I think it's been a little bit of a struggle in recent years. I think this year is going to be really good. And then from a business point of view, the industry is in very strong position at the moment. Things are good.
And kind of from the outside's point of view, because I have to admit I'm not maybe the biggest F1 fan in the world, but from outside, it's been through, from a business perspective, been through a tricky couple of years, kind of perception-wise.
So one of the things that I get asked to talk about, and it's because of what the business has been through, is managing change and transformation.
Yeah.
And the reason why we've had to manage a lot of change and transformation in Formula One is that our business model broke.
Okay.
Now, this is something I love doing with audiences. I love to ask audiences, how do you think we make money? And to this day, people put their hand up and they say, you sell sponsorship. And then I have to explain that the sponsorship model broke because most of our sponsorship for 40 years came from tobacco, and it was banned. And the sport is so expensive, there is no other sector that's going to provide that level of funding. Yeah. So we still have sponsors, but sponsors provide about 25 to 30% of our revenue. So we have to make 70% of our revenue doing something else. Yeah. So we now sell digital broadcast content. We sell events to countries around the world. So we Formula One actually competes with FIFA World Cup and the Olympic Games to sell events to governments. So our customers are governments. Okay. So for example, in 2020, we have a Vietnamese Grand Prix. Okay. Now people might say, why on earth are you racing in Vietnam? We're racing in Vietnam because the Vietnamese government wants to promote Vietnam as a sporting business and tourism destination. Yeah. Vietnam cannot afford to have the Olympic Games or the Soccer World Cup. They can't afford to have Formula One, and they've signed a 5-year deal. So that puts Vietnam in the sporting map for a week every year, and I think it's good value for money. So we're racing in Hanoi starting in 2020, and my good friend David Coulthard has been over there actually demonstrating a Formula One car on the streets of Ho Chi Minh, and 100,000 people turned out just to see a car drive up and down the high street. So
and so they're building a bespoke.
And they're building a bespoke track there in Hanoi. So that's going to be exciting. So we're making money in different ways, and then for the individual teams, how teams are making money is we've taken a step back and looked at where we really can drive value to customers, and it turns out that the thing that we were doing anyway, which is creating great technology, turns out to be the thing that customers actually want. So you have McLaren and Williams and Red Bull, teams like that, selling technology solutions into industry. Okay. So Williams Formula One team working with Sainsbury's and Aldi and Lidl on energy efficiency. Yeah. So, and when I tell audiences about the transformation of Formula One's business model and how we've had to manage profound change in how we make our money, who our customers are, where they are, how we do business with them, that's one of the things that then I think clients find that an interesting insight into what happens when you have to reinvent the game, which I think for a lot of companies is something they're going
Well, absolutely right now in the world we live in, you have to be looking at it. So just out of interest, do you think we're ever going to see a Tesla type company on the F1 grid?
So absolutely, a really good question. I've actually just finished reading a wonderful book about Elon Musk's amazing transformation of the automotive industry, and it's one that I very passionately feel about because having travelled the globe for 30 years, seen the effects of environmental damage and pollution and industrialization and all of the things that we know happen as a result of using a fossil fuel based economy.
Yes.
I'm right behind this big shift towards electric. I drive an electric car, and people say, well, how can a petrol head from Formula One like that? But of course, the reality is in Formula One, we use petrol electric hybrids, and we have done since 2014. And the future of motorsport is electric. And we've had Formula E for 4 years, and Formula One has played a big part in providing the technology for Formula E. So the batteries for a Formula E car come from the McLaren Formula One team. Okay. They make the batteries. Yeah. McLaren also made the electric motors for Formula E. So quite often people say to me, do we see Formula E as the enemy? Actually, no. We see Formula One as an incubator for technologies that will ultimately enable Formula One to go fully electric.
Okay, and can I get a prediction from you as how long that will take?
I think it will happen pre-2030.
Okay.
And I say that because the automotive industry sees the next 10 years as a transitional phase when most vehicles will be hybrid.
Okay.
A growing minority will be electrified. So Volkswagen have announced, actually yesterday, just the day before you and I are talking, Volkswagen have announced that by 2030 they will have 70 new models and 40% of their production will be fully electric. Wow. Now, as the automotive industry shifts towards fully electric, Formula One will reflect that because we have Honda, we have Renault-Nissan Group, we have Mercedes-Benz, we have, of course, Ferrari, which is the Fiat Chrysler Group, and so we will undoubtedly provide some of the innovation.
Yes. Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Are you presumably you're ahead of the mass industry?
So, it's like you've teed up this question perfectly.
Thank you very much.
So the current engine in Lewis Hamilton's car is the most efficient fossil fuel powered internal combustion engine the world has ever seen. Okay. So if I give you a measure of it, so the car, if anyone is watching this who drives a petrol or a diesel engine car, the efficiency of that engine is about 30%. So that means that 70% of the fossil fuel that goes into it gets wasted. Lewis Hamilton's is over 50% thermal efficiency. Now the car industry is mind blown that Formula One can achieve 50% thermal efficiency. Bizarrely, that means that Lewis Hamilton's Formula One car is incredibly fuel efficient, which is not something that you would expect someone from Formula One to say.
Absolutely.
But fuel efficiency is where the automotive industry is at, and unless we are relevant to our customers, we're out of business. And so if you talk to the chief executive of Daimler, Dieter Zetsche will say, the only reason we can be in Formula One is if it's relevant to our business, and if it's irrelevant, we'd be out of it. So again, it's all about customer value, and unless we actually can appeal to those customers, then we won't have them.
Fascinating, properly fascinating. So let me ask you a question. Kind of, I know you spend a lot of time certainly working with David Coulthard up on stage. How did that come about, and kind of can we get some other name drops of who else you enjoy up on stage with? And
so the working with David Coulthard came as a result of, and I'll tell you the honest story. I was getting a lot of calls from agents saying, Mark, we love your content, but you're not famous.
Oh, Mark, no, you are famous.
No, but I'm not famous. And you know, the reality is we know that for certain types of events and for certain clients, having a speaker who is instantly recognizable because their fame goes beyond the little sector that they work in is actually an important thing. So initially I used to say, well, you know, what do you want the telephone number of someone? So they would say, yes, can we speak to Michael Schumacher, or can we telephone Jensen Button? And so one day I sat down with David Coulthard because I happen to know that David loves presenting in front of a corporate audience. He enjoys that landscape, and he's articulate, and frankly, he's committed. You know, if he says he's going to do an event, he will do it. So we started working together, doing a moderated Q&A, but it's slightly deeper than a moderated Q&A, and it's sometimes can be difficult to fully communicate to a client why this works. But it's because I know David so well and his career intimately, I can make sure that what we present is tailored to the messaging that the client is looking for. I also help to keep him on track. So if he starts to talk too much about maybe the sporting aspect, I can bring him back to the business aspect. So we started working together 7 years ago, and we do 15 to 20 events a year together. And he also sometimes does events where we actually provide, the royal we, David and I, will provide the content for a host or another moderator to ask him the questions, particularly if I'm not available. And then, of course, what happened was, of course, inevitably, we had a few occasions when David wasn't available, or we had an occasion, actually, I can remember very well, where a client specifically wanted a Formula One world champion.
Yes. And
sadly, David never won the title. He finished second. So he's very humble about it, but and actually he's very funny to talk to.
Do you bring it up regularly?
Well, it's funny, we did an event 2 weeks ago, and he was introduced on stage and by the host, who had not read